Hello, this is Russell Moore, and this is the audio version of the More to the Point newsletter, which you can get in your inbox every Wednesday by clicking on the link in the show notes. It's free and is delivered to you every week. Today, I want to talk about how Christianity embraces nihilism. Turns out, when you mix narcissism and nihilism, you create an acid that corrodes every belief system it touches. That's a quote from my friend David Brooks in the latest issue of The Atlantic about the conservative movement, a movement that he once claimed for himself. Brooks notes that despite all of the elite versus the people messaging, virtually all of the national leaders he sees celebrating cruelty and vice are Ivy League, wealthy. He dubs them vineyard vines nihilists. Brooks argues that this would be bad enough were it just a political matter, but the nihilism has eaten away at Christianity too. Many of these nihilists, Brooks writes, ostentatiously identify as Christians, but don't talk about Jesus very much. Brooks writes that they have crosses on their chest, but Nietzsche in their hearts, or to be more precise, a high school sophomore's version of Nietzsche. Brooks writes, quote, to Nietzsche, all of those Christian pieties about justice, peace, love, and civility are constraints that the weak erect to emasculate the strong. In this view, Nietzscheanism is a morality for winners. It worships the pagan virtues, power, courage, glory, will, self assertion, as well as domination over, quote, those sick sentimentalists who practice compassion, end quote. When it comes to Christianity, at least one thinker did see nihilism coming over 40 years ago. In his 1986 book, The Seduction of Christianity, French philosopher Jacques Ellul warned that a move of Christianity toward nihilism, literally the belief in nothing, was already happening and happening in recognizable stages. Ellul argued that Christianity moves toward nihilism when we see, as he puts it, quote, the transforming of a living movement of relationship into an achieved and definite situation, end quote. He argues that this kind of freezing of a relational religion into an artifact was anticipated by the New Testament itself. Quote, this was the mistake of the disciples when they saw the transfiguration and proposed to set up the tent so that they could remain in the ineffable light in the company with Moses and Elijah. Quote, it is the mistake of an attempt to solidify in an arrested, comprehensive, and explicable system that which is in unforeseeable movement towards some outcome, end quote. You know, when I first read this passage, years and years and years ago, I kind of disagreed with Ellul. In some ways, I still would. At first glance, Ellul seems to be making a sharp distinction between doctrine and experience, characteristic of much of the Protestant liberalism of the 19th and 20th centuries. As a careful student of Karl Barth, Ellul would have known that an experiential Christianity shorn of an objective word of doctrine leads to its own kind of nihilism, the natural theology that evolved into the Volk religion of German blood and soil, which led, of course, ultimately to the death camps. And if what Ellul meant by freezing and objectifying the living revelational relation of Christ into a commitment to a canonical textual authority, the Bible, which stands outside of us and over every person in the church, I would argue that's not really our problem. Our present nihilism is the exact opposite. Many of those urging evangelicals to get real and thus to get over the losing mentality of the Sermon on the Mount speak loudly about the authority of the Bible, but strangely say very little of the actual words of the Bible. In fact, many of those most gleeful in empowering the kind of Nietzscheanism Brooks describes are far more conversant with natural law than with biblical text, with a quote unquote worldview abstracted from the text rather than the actual text itself, with its narrative and poetry and calls to sacrifice, as well as with its doctrinal systems and moral admonitions. If I can think of one defining characteristic that I could have and should have seen coming, It would be to beware of those who love Christology but not Jesus, who love biblical authority but not the Bible, who love conservatism but not that which is to be conserved. That, in fact, is the stage Elul was most prophetic in seeing from afar, what he calls dissociation. He wrote, quote, "It breaks the link between the word and him who speaks it, between persona and proclamation. That is, the fact that the word of Jesus is true only because it is he who speaks it," end quote. Elul argued that this happens wherever there is the articulation of, quote, "a Christian morality that is independent of faith and conversion," contrary to what the New Testament teaches about morality. He wrote that the perennial temptation of the church to take up an effort, quote, "to achieve objective conduct without reference to the spiritual life, without the knowledge of God in Jesus Christ," end quote, is where this comes from. In that sense, the old song is right. There's nothing cold as ashes after the fire is gone. As Flannery O'Connor put it, quote, "Our response to life is different if we have been taught only a definition of faith than it is if we have trembled with Abraham as he held the knife over Isaac. Both of these kinds of knowledge are necessary. But in the last 4 or 5 centuries, we in the church have overemphasized the abstract and consequently impoverished our imagination and our capacity for prophetic insight," end quote. Christianity is more than just a personal relationship with Jesus. That's true, but it certainly cannot ever be less than that. When people created to be in communion with God through Christ in a living communion replace that with, quote unquote, the experience of the numinous, or some kind of moral admonitions disconnected from Christ, they end up with something different than Christianity. And whenever they try to replace that living faith with a set of ever narrowing doctrinal requirements or worldview propositions, they end up filling the need for vitality with what seems most alive at the moment. And in our moment, that's politics. That comes ready-made with its own version of revival and lots of heretics to hunt and boundaries to police, all with the added bonus that one not only need not crucify the flesh, but that one can actually celebrate the utilitarian purposes of what Jesus has told us lead to death. The American church has not yielded fully, or even, I think and pray, mostly to nihilism. But as God warned Cain, it is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. Genesis 4:7. The hour, though, is late. The tents are here on the mountaintop, but where's Moses? Where's Elijah? Where's the glory? To find that again, we must listen for the voice that once thundered from that cloud. "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." A church that turns from nihilism will be disoriented at first, just as Peter, James, and John were in that moment. But the end result will be the same. As Matthew 17 puts it, "And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only." Our evangelical cliches, at least a lot of them, have proven to be truer than we knew. Jesus plus nothing equals everything. The statement used to be made from the pulpit. It's true, you know. Jesus plus nothing does equal everything. Jesus plus nihilism, though, is impossible. We must love the one and hate the other. This is the More to the Point audio newsletter. Sign up in the show notes to get it in your inbox for free every Wednesday, and we will see you next time. This is Russell Moore.